Hi, folks, and welcome back to the Koalas. In today's last session of the series from the software development lifecycle, and that's story closing. And story closing is one of the exciting points. We can finally point our story points and see progress towards the product. But what's actually an important part of story closing? Who is part of it and what we expect from the different roles? Let's start off with Pia. What's your participation in that story closing part, and how do you bring value to it?
Well, the QA's part for the story closing is from my experience, like bringing in all like the test results. Like before, we in our last session we said we come together as a team from the various disciplines and we just review if everything from our perspective is done. And there I was already involved. I take there mainly the PO perspective, the user perspective. So I'm kind of the user's advocate there. So also when closing the story, I see the main benefit, like what we as a team and what I myself maybe tested from a user perspective, but also looking at the business objective. So I can provide, when it comes to story closing, I can provide to the PO a recommendation and some, things I've recommendation if it's fine, or maybe point out some risks I see from my QA perspective, and so that our PO in the end can make the final decision. But does the PO always have to make the final decision? I know that's on your mind. So from my perspective, no. It depends on the story, and it depends how mature your team is. Yeah.
I mean, a point which speaks also for that is that the QA and the PO has a very close interaction together throughout the whole product development lifecycle or software development lifecycle, but I call it product because from requirements engineering on, you're very closely involved with the PO. You or QAs in general need to understand what's the business impact and what's the user then doing with the features we have, and they're supporting the PO actually in those tasks that he can concentrate on his core responsibilities and spend more time with the team, with arranging requirements helps most of the time, because I see Outlook calendars of POs and they're disgusting, to put it bluntly. What's your point, Rodrigo? What do you bring in for the story closing?
Yeah, in the story closing, like after working for a whole iteration in development, right? You naturally identify future risks and also future opportunities, right? Because you wrote the code, so you know which parts will be hard to change and which parts are primed to be extended, right? And then while you're presenting what was done briefly to the product owner, I think it aggregates a lot of value if you also point out, like, in terms of the technology, hey, if you want to make some advanced search here, it wouldn't be a lot of work because those two components are designed such and such way that this is not a lot of work. But if you want to add two filters, yeah, don't do that, because this is gonna break everything. We're not considering this a possibility. So I think this is a good moment to elicitate both opportunities, risks, and limitations to the PO, because that will affect the product roadmap, right?
Definitely. And when we now talked what you bring to the table, what's actually the objective of the story closing? Just like what we said before, right? We already talked about it, about functionalities, but now we have this meeting and we close the story. I mean, we really want to verify the definition of done in this meeting, right? So that actually everything that we think should be done within a story is actually done. And this is somehow the last quality gate. We have to ensure that even though other steps were skipped in the past, if that's a kickoff, is that not checking an acceptance criteria. Perhaps someone added an acceptance criteria without the others noticing. Yes, all happened. Shouldn't, but all happened. So verifying the definition of done is a huge point. What do you see as a very important point for a definition of done? Pia, you're already thought about some points. I see it. What's your idea?
Yeah, it's like the obvious things. I mean, as we discussed already in our last session, is like that the thing, is it a story, a bug fix, whatever, is tested on an environment where it makes sense. So where we have all the things we need to make a final decision. And then gets forgotten far too often in daily life, unfortunately. And also dependencies or some, I don't like the word documentation, but I'm not talking about some, papers nobody ever reads again, but I speak more about things like if we have like something in our Confluence, in our wiki, what we really need every day, or let's say every month, then we just check, is everything up to date and in line? That gets forgotten quite often, and I want to have that in a definition of done, that those things are just checked. If nothing needs to be updated, that's fine, but then at least we have had a quick look if we have forgotten something. And I mean, we've talked about tests before. We've talked about technical depth, but that's also things like, I don't know exactly how to frame it, because I also don't want to have my definition of done like blown up with everything. That doesn't make sense, because if it's too big, my experience is nobody looks at it, nobody cares. So it should be like, it should have enough points to that it's useful, but not too many. Yeah. But also there, we could make a whole session about definition of ready and definition of done and what should be in there and why.
Yeah, for me, there's one point that needs to be there. It's, is it production ready? If it's not production ready, then it's not done. Like some people argue that, hey, if it's not done, if it's not in production. Some people argue that, hey, that may be too soon. But regardless of what is your personal preference, I think the code should be production ready. If we want to deploy this now, we should be able to do it without fearing like bringing down everything. So I think that's the true definition of done. And then the level of comfort, like what you need to feel like you're comfortable to put something in production. Now, those are the points that fill that document, the definition of done. But it could be just one thing. Is it production ready? Yes, and it's done.
I just want to highlight what you said is that the code should be production ready. I want to also, perhaps I want to rephrase that a bit. And my point is, whatever story I close, I don't want to touch again. For me, that should be just like done. I don't need to remember about it again, because it was part of this sprint, part of the work we did. We tackled all what we needed, and then you shouldn't necessarily be remembered about that to perhaps check something in the future. And that's for me a very important point, which I believe a lot out there can profit from that credo. Just think now within the story closing, do I need to remember anything about that story? Do I need to check anything? And if you do, the story is not up for closure. Or we have other options as well, and that would be to split the story, right? And this comes into play not only when we are successfully implemented a story, but also it could happen that during the story kickoff, which we talked about in one of the last sessions, it comes out, oh, we don't have the technical foundations to actually proceed the way the story was intended, right? So we have different options there as well to close stories, also perhaps close stories partially. But what should we take care of when we do such things? Rodrigo, do you have any ideas on that?
Well, if you're going to break down the story because it was partially done, of course, one obvious thing you need to know is why you were unable to do the whole scope of the story, right? And then renegotiate that scope with the PO and perhaps reprioritize, because maybe that's not as valuable as the PO initially thought, right? It would be good to have an opportunity to see how that runs, gather some data, like usage data analytics, and then make sure that the functionality really needs to be augmented by that which was not done. So that's one way to go about it. So not necessarily the part that was not done should go to the top of the backlog, because it's always best to work with more information, right? Having something, think of it like an MVP, right? So an MVP, you're just testing the waters. So that's an opportunity to see, do you really need to do that, the rest of that implementation or not? Then you can make a more informed decision, a data-driven decision, right?
Interesting. For me, it's just, it shouldn't happen, right? So it shouldn't happen that we randomly in the kickoff think, oh, we cannot proceed, we cannot do that. So actually, to wrap it up very quickly, in the story closing, we verify that everything that we plan to implement within that story was actually implemented, that it's tested on their environment we think is suited for it. And at the end also that the story is as far implemented that we never need to think about it again in the future. That would be the great case. And with that, I comment us some points and see the progression going on. And with that topic also done, we would like to thank you very all for your attention to our talk. It was, for me, so much fun to produce this series, and I would like to invite you, give us some comments, give us some feedback, and perhaps also some hints which topics you would like to see us in the future to cover a bit more in depth and a bit more specifically. With that, thank you very much and have a very wonderful built-in quality day. See you. Bye.
Thank you. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.